Buckingham Palace. Early morning. The sky above London was overcast, but the rain held off. The air smelled faintly of dew and exhaust, as it often did near the palace gates. Guards had already taken their ceremonial positions, their scarlet tunics pressed, boots polished like obsidian, and bearskin caps standing tall. Tourists milled about, selfie sticks and camera flashes blending into a constant hum of modern life buzzing around centuries of tradition. Beneath it all, Guard Arthur Langley stood motionless. He was 34, face clean-shaven, posture so perfect it could have been sculpted from marble. Beneath his helmet, his jaw remained set, and eyes focused on nothing yet observing everything. Scene 2. Enter. George Alden. A black cab pulled up on the far side of the courtyard, tires hissing slightly on the wet stone. From it stepped an elderly man. George Alden, 85 years old, Royal Army veteran, decorated, forgotten, and worn by time. He stepped out slowly, one hand gripping a wooden cane that had seen better days. His other hand clutched a small, worn velvet box. His jacket was a vintage military cut, its fabric faded, but lovingly cared for. Pinned to the left breast were 4 military ribbons, 2 of them for valor. His pace was steady, measured. Tourists instinctively moved aside. He did not look up at the palace. He looked at the guard. Guard Langley saw him. Of course he did. Not with a glance, not with a nod, but with the subtle shift in his stance that only a fellow soldier would notice. He straightened his shoulders just slightly, as if acknowledging something unspoken. George stopped 10 feet from the guard. For a long time he said nothing. Then, with a trembling hand, he opened the box. Inside, 2 medals, one for bravery under fire in Cyprus, one for leading a rescue mission in the Falklands. He tried to pin them to his coat, ceremonially, perhaps foolishly, but he dropped them. The medals clinked sharply against the stone ground. A painful sound, sharp, undignified. George winced, not just from the pain in his knees as he bent, but from what it meant. He tried to retrieve them. His fingers, twisted by arthritis, betrayed him. A group of teenagers nearby chuckled. One pointed. "Oi, look! The old man's dropping his tin badges." The laughter wasn't loud, but it was enough. A woman nearby stepped in. "Hey, leave him be." One boy walked over, picked up a medal, and tossed it like it was a coin. "Not worth much, this." The other boy kicked the second medal lazily toward the drain. Guard Langley didn't flinch, didn't move, couldn't. Not yet. Protocol was ironclad. Do, not, break, formation. His jaw tightened, his breathing slowed. He watched the medal skid against the stone. His mind went back years. Arthur's squad had taken fire. Chaos, smoke, screams. One of his men was trapped under rubble. He'd ignored the command to hold position and dove into the chaos. Dragged the soldier back, body bloodied and shaking. He was reprimanded, then decorated. That same night, his commander told him, "Sometimes doing the right thing costs you more than medals, but do it anyway." The laughter of the teenagers rang louder than it should have. George didn't look up. He stood in silence, defeated. Langley's eyes followed the kicked medal. His fingers twitched. Muscles flexed beneath polished brass and red wool. The tourists turned, sensing tension. Would he move? Was this the moment? Langley took one breath. Then he broke formation. It was quiet, almost unnoticed. One foot stepped forward. Then another. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The Queen's Guard? Moving? No camera flash caught it in time. No TikTok filtered it. It was too raw, too real. Langley walked calmly toward George, ignoring the murmurs. He stopped beside the old man, and without a word, he kneeled. picked up the medals, held them in his palm, inspecting them like sacred objects, then turned, slowly, respectfully, and offered them back. George took them with both hands. He trembled. "I dropped more than medals today," he whispered. Langley met his eyes. "You didn't drop anything, sir. We just forgot to see it," tourists murmured as Langley resumed his place. But the atmosphere had changed. The silence he left behind felt deeper than before. George turned and began to walk away. A bit straighter this time. But not everyone was pleased. Across the street, a man in a gray trench coat lowered his camera. His badge caught the light. Royal Guard Division Inspectorate. Name: Commander Saul Fenwick. He tapped his phone. Violation: documented, breaking formation without imminent threat. Notify command. Later that evening, Langley sat on a wooden bench in the mess hall. His uniform was hung neatly. Steam from his tea curled upward, untouched. A fellow guard, Jenkins, approached. "You really did it, didn't you?" he said quietly. "In broad daylight." Langley didn't answer. "You're going to be reprimanded. Maybe worse." "I know," he replied. "Worth it?" Langley looked up. "He served. He bled. And we were about to let that go unnoticed." Jenkins sat down, silent. Then, "They won't understand that in command." Maybe they don't need to. Maybe he did. George sat alone in his flat, medals in hand, tea cooling beside him. A photo sat on the table. 3 men in uniform. One was him. The other 2 had died in the Falklands. He pressed a trembling finger to their faces. "They saw me today, boys," he whispered. "One of them still remembers." He smiled weakly, then turned on the news. Unprecedented moment today outside Buckingham Palace, as a Queen's Guard broke formation to assist an elderly veteran whose medals had fallen. The act, while moving, may have violated strict ceremonial protocol. George shook his head. It always comes back to rules. The video had been captured. Blurry, handheld, but unmistakable. A Queen's Guard. Moving. Kneeling. Handing back medals. Saluting. Within 6 hours, it was on BBC, then Reddit, then Twitter X, then TikTok. He broke protocol for respect. Some traditions are meant to be challenged. This is what service looks like. But not all responses were kind. He compromised centuries of ceremonial standard. Queen's Guards are not social workers. He disrespected his position. Langley was summoned to an internal hearing. Commander Fenwick presided. "Sergeant Arthur Langley, you stand before the Royal Guard Disciplinary Committee for breaking active ceremonial formation at 11:13 a.m. yesterday morning. Your reason?" Langley stood tall, calm. "I retrieved the medals of a fellow soldier. He could not. No one else would. That is not your duty." Langley looked him in the eye. "With respect, Commander, it is always my duty to honor those who served." Fenwick slammed a file shut. "That's not your place to decide." "No, sir," Langley replied, "but it is my place to act when no one else will." Silence. A board member cleared her throat. "Recommendation: temporary suspension, public apology." Langley didn't flinch. "I will not apologize for honoring sacrifice." A young journalist visited George's flat. "We'd love your comments for our feature, Mr. Alden." He held up the medals. "They're just pieces of metal," George said. "But what that young man did, he reminded me that they still meant something, that someone still saw them." He paused. "I don't want him punished. I want him recognized." In barracks across the city, whispers began. "Langley? He's the one who helped that vet, yeah?" "Damn right." An anonymous letter was pinned to the corkboard at Guard HQ. "Rules preserve tradition, but compassion preserves purpose." former Captain Thomas Myers. Another appeared beside it the next morning. A soldier who cannot honor the past has no place guarding the present. Within days, #HonorLangley trended. Over 500,000 signatures called for medal commendation, not punishment. Veterans posted photos of themselves saluting their screens. Young cadets reenacted the scene on TikTok with tears in their eyes. A 10-year-old boy with cerebral palsy posted, "One day I want to visit London. I hope someone like that guard will be there when I do." In Parliament, an MP addressed the chamber. "If our institutions punish dignity, then they dishonor it. That guard showed more strength in kneeling than most of us show in standing." Claps echoed across the floor. Commander Fenwick watched from his office window, silent, brooding. He opened Langley's file again. George returned to Buckingham Palace a week later, alone again. But this time, something was different. Crowds stepped aside respectfully. Several even nodded. One family offered him their front-row view. A new guard stood motionless at the post. George didn't expect a reaction. He just stood and saluted. But something remarkable happened. The guard didn't move, but a tear slipped silently down his cheek. And George smiled. He had been seen. A letter arrived. From Office of the Crown Sergeant Langley was requested for a private audience. At the palace. He arrived in formal attire. Inside, he stood at attention. And was met, not with scolding, but with a voice. The Crown recognizes those who carry tradition not only on their shoulders, but in their hearts. You are among them. He was handed a small velvet box. Inside, the Royal Medal for Ethical Distinction, an honor rarely awarded, and never to a ceremonial guard. His eyes did not water, but his heart did. Buckingham Palace Courtyard. 1 month later, the sun broke through a rare stretch of London cloud. Warm, golden light bathed the grey stones of the palace grounds. A quiet crowd had gathered, not for a royal procession, not for a parade, but for a single man. Guard Arthur Langley stood at his post once more, not suspended, not demoted, reinstated with commendation. But that wasn't why people were watching. Near the front, in a chair brought just for him, sat George Alden. In his hands, the same medals. Repinned, polished. Pride restored. At precisely noon, a small bell rang. From the palace steps emerged a senior official. "We invite Sergeant Langley and Mr. Alden forward." Langley stepped out of formation, this time by invitation. George stood with effort. Langley met him halfway. No words. Langley dropped to one knee. He pinned a small silver ribbon to George's coat. For inspiring service to the Crown. Awarded not by protocol, but by choice. The crowd rose to its feet in silence. George placed a hand on Langley's shoulder. "Thank you, son." Langley saluted. "No, sir. Thank you." Back in his modest flat, George began receiving letters from schools, from veterans, from children. "You helped our students understand honor. I never knew soldiers like you still existed. I'm going to show my grandpa your story. He was in Korea, too." One letter came from a boy named Adam, age 12. "Dear Mr. Alden, I want to be a guard when I grow up, not just to stand still, but to stand up, like Mr. Langley did. Thank you for dropping your medals, and thank you for picking them back up." George wept reading it, not because it hurt, but because it healed. Langley returned home to a quiet room. He removed his cap, placed it gently on the table, and stared at the box containing the medal the Crown had given him. Then he opened a drawer. Inside, A photo of his late grandfather in uniform. A letter from his father, never mailed. A dog tag that once belonged to a fallen friend in Kandahar. He placed the new medal next to them. "Another weight," he whispered, "but this one I'll carry with pride." Weeks later, a young woman from Canada visited London. She posted a simple video. "I didn't film him because he moved. I filmed him because he didn't have to move that day. But he did anyway." Behind her, Guard Langley stood tall, still, unshaken. Caption: "Tradition didn't break. It grew." 3 months later. George Alden passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was found in his armchair, medals on his chest, TV remote in his hand, and a photo of Langley's salute in his lap. He'd circled a quote from a newspaper article taped nearby. "The moment we forgot to honor the past, we began dishonoring the future." His funeral was modest, but Guard Langley was there. So were Jenkins and other guards. They stood in full ceremonial uniform at the rear of the chapel. Not as requirement, but as respect. When the coffin was lowered, Langley stepped forward and did something no guard had ever done publicly at a civilian burial. He removed his bearskin cap and bowed, slow, silent, absolute. Back at Buckingham Palace, a boy passed by the guards with his father. "Daddy," the boy whispered, "why don't they move?" His father smiled. "They only move when it really matters, son." The boy nodded, eyes wide, and raised his hand in a crisp little salute. Langley didn't blink, but deep inside, he smiled. He dropped his medals, and for a moment, the world almost didn't notice. But one man did, and in bending down to pick them up, he lifted far more than bronze and ribbon. He lifted a nation's forgotten memory, a soldier's dignity, and the quiet truth that sometimes stillness can roar